Zach suggested they throw their New Year's Eve party there. Nobody objected. The idea of a haunted house party was too good to pass up. Plus, who could resist ringing in the new year with a little thrill? By 10 o'clock, the place was alive again. Music boomed from portable speakers, and fairy lights strung across the peeling wallpaper gave the rotting grandeur a festive glow. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air as 20 or so partygoers danced and drank, the bitter winter chill outside forgotten. Jenny, standing by the fireplace with a plastic cup in hand, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had followed her since they arrived. She watched her friends laughing and stumbling through the cavernous rooms, but felt like they weren't alone. "Creepy, huh?" a voice said behind her. Jenny turned to see Brandon, one of Zach's friends, leaning against the mantel. "A little," she admitted, glancing at the shadows pooling in the corners. "You think the stories are true? About the murders?" Brandon grinned. "Who knows? But places like this, they soak up bad energy. You can feel it." Jenny didn't laugh. She could feel it too. Something about the manor felt alive, watching, waiting. By 11:30, the party was in full swing. Zach gathered everyone in the main hall, where a grand staircase curled up into the darkness. He stood on the steps, raising a bottle of champagne. "All right, everyone. Time for the midnight toast." Cheers erupted, and Zach grinned. "But first, let's make it interesting. Who's up for a little dare?" Jenny's stomach sank as the crowd egged him on. Zach loved pushing boundaries, and in a place like this, she knew it wouldn't end well. "Let's split into pairs," Zach continued, "and explore the house. First pair to make it to the attic, and back wins the last bottle of champagne." Jenny shook her head. "This is a bad idea," she whispered to Brandon, but he just shrugged, already pairing off with another girl. Reluctantly, Jenny found herself partnered with Mia, a freshman who seemed more excited than scared. Armed with their phones for flashlights, they climbed the creaking staircase, the others disappearing into the labyrinth of hallways ahead of them. The air grew colder as they ascended, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Dust hung in the air, and the faint smell of mildew tickled Jenny's nose. "Creepy," Mia said, her voice too loud in the silence. Jenny shushed her, straining to listen. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed. Then another. "Wind," Mia said quickly, but her voice wavered. They reached the attic door at 11:55. Jenny pushed it open, revealing a room filled with forgotten relics. Broken furniture, crates of yellowed newspapers, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. "Let's go back," Jenny said, her heart pounding, but as they turned, the attic door slammed shut. "Hey!" Mia shouted, pulling at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Jenny's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the corner, its outline barely visible in the dim light. "Mia!" Jenny's voice was a whisper. The figure moved, stepping into the faint glow. Its face was pale, its eyes hollow, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Jenny screamed as the thing lunged, its bony fingers reaching for her. She grabbed Mia, pulling her toward the far wall. The clock downstairs struck midnight, and the house erupted in cheers. But in the attic, Jenny and Mia weren't celebrating. They pounded on the door, their screams drowned out by the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. When Zach finally noticed they hadn't returned, it was hours past midnight. The police found their phones abandoned in the attic, their flashlights still flickering. Of Jenny and Mia, there was no sign. Only the cracked mirror, which now held two faint reflections where there should have been none. The partygoers fled the manor that night, but whispers of the curse spread. Every New Year's Eve, the manor seemed to call to the reckless, luring them in with promises of celebration. And every year, the house grew a little more full, its shadowy residents waiting for the next midnight. This year, Olivia and her friends had scored a keg, smuggled in some liquor, and spread the word around school. By 10 p.m., the place was packed with half the senior class, music blasting and the air thick with the smell of cheap beer and cigarettes. Olivia leaned against a post, sipping from a red cup, watching the crowd with a mix of excitement and unease. The barn felt too empty despite the people. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and the wind whistled through the cracks in the wooden boards. "You're overthinking again, Maddie," her best friend said, nudging her. "Relax. It's New Year's." Olivia forced a smile. "Yeah, you're right." A loud bang cut through the music, silencing the crowd. Everyone turned toward the entrance, where a figure stood illuminated by the single bulb hanging above the door. It was a cop. The man was tall, with a weathered face and a tight-lipped smile. His uniform looked official enough, but something about him seemed off. Maybe it was the way his eyes scanned the crowd, lingering too long on each person, or the way his hand rested on his holstered gun. "Evening, kids," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Party's over." Groans and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the braver kids tried to protest. "Sir, we're not doing anything wrong." "Underage drinking is wrong," the cop snapped, his smile widening. "Now, everyone out. Single file. No arguments." Reluctantly, the group began to shuffle toward the door. Olivia exchanged a nervous glance with Maddie. "Something's not right," Olivia whispered. Maddie rolled her eyes. "It's just a cop. He'll scare us and send us home. Don't overthink." As the teens filed out into the frigid night, they noticed something strange. There was no squad car, just an old black pickup truck parked haphazardly by the road. The cop ushered them forward, counting under his breath. 28, 29, 30. "Perfect," he muttered. "Perfect for what?" one boy asked. The cop's smile dropped. "Shut up. Keep moving." He led the group down the road, away from town, away from safety. Olivia's unease turned into full-blown panic. She tugged at Maddie's sleeve. "We need to run," she whispered. "Run where?" Maddie hissed back. "He has a gun." The group walked for what felt like miles before they reached a clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated shed, its windows boarded up, its roof sagging. Inside, the cop ordered. "No way," a boy named Jake said. "We're not going in there." The cop drew his gun, silencing the protests. "I said, inside." The teens obeyed, filing into the dark, musty shed. Olivia's heart raced as she looked around. Chains and hooks hung from the walls, glinting in the moonlight. The smell of decay was overwhelming. "What is this?" Maddie whispered, her voice trembling. The cop locked the door behind them, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight. "You kids think you're invincible," he said, pacing. "Drinking, partying, breaking the law. Someone's got to teach you a lesson." Panic erupted as the teens realized his intentions. They screamed, pounded on the walls, begged for mercy. The cop laughed. "Scream all you want. No one can hear you out here." Olivia's mind raced. She scanned the room for anything that could be used as a weapon. Her eyes landed on a rusted crowbar propped against the wall. "Distract him," she whispered to Maddie. "What?" Maddie looked horrified. "Just do it." Maddie stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Please, sir, you don't have to do this." As the cop turned his attention to Maddie, Olivia lunged for the crowbar. She gripped it tightly and swung with all her strength, connecting with the side of his head. The cop stumbled, blood trickling down his temple, but he didn't fall. Instead, he turned to Olivia, his face twisted in rage. "You little—" Before he could finish, Jake tackled him from behind. The other teens joined in, using their numbers to overpower him. In the chaos, Olivia grabbed the cop's keys and unlocked the door. "Run!" she screamed. The group scattered into the woods, their breath visible in the freezing air. Olivia and Maddie stuck together, running until their legs gave out. They collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. In the distance, they could hear the cop shouting, his voice echoing through the trees. "We have to keep moving," Olivia said, pulling Maddie to her feet. They ran all night, finally reaching the outskirts of town as dawn broke. The police didn't believe their story at first, but when they searched the shed and found the chains, hooks, and bloodstains, they realized the teens had narrowly escaped a serial killer. New Year's Eve was a night of revelry and recklessness, and every year, the roads became a gauntlet of bad decisions. Taylor knew this, but she hadn't planned to be out this late. She'd left the party early, annoyed at her friends for getting too drunk to care that she was leaving alone. Her phone had died hours ago, and the rideshare surge prices were ridiculous. So, despite the nagging voice in her head telling her it wasn't a good idea, she climbed into her car. The highway stretched out in front of her, dark and empty except for the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the road with a light layer of white that glowed under her high beams. Taylor focused hard on the road, her hands gripping the wheel as she swerved to avoid a pothole. She'd only had one drink, but even that small buzz made her nervous. She kept telling herself she was fine, repeating it like a mantra. "I'm fine. I can do this." The first sign of trouble was the car. It appeared out of nowhere in her rearview mirror, its headlights too bright and too close. Taylor's chest tightened. She sped up slightly, hoping to put some distance between herself and the aggressive driver. But the car matched her speed, tailgating her so closely she could feel the pressure of its presence. "Okay, buddy, back off," she muttered, glancing in the mirror again. The car's headlights blinked off, plunging the road behind her into darkness. Taylor blinked in confusion. When the lights came back on, the car was gone. Her pulse quickened, and she shook her head, trying to convince herself she was just tired, her mind playing tricks on her. She glanced over her shoulder to confirm the car had disappeared. That's when she saw it again, this time ahead of her. A black truck sat idling at the side of the road, its taillights glowing like red eyes. Taylor slowed, dread pooling in her stomach. As she passed the truck, it pulled out onto the highway, following her. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles white. Just some jerk messing around, she told herself, though her voice was shaky. But the truck wasn't messing around. It sped up, pulling alongside her. Taylor turned her head and froze. Through the darkened window, she could see the driver, a figure wearing a mask shaped like a grinning skull. Her breath caught in her throat. The truck swerved toward her, forcing her car onto the shoulder. She slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as she came to a halt. The truck stopped a few yards ahead, its engine growling like an animal ready to pounce. Taylor's hands trembled as she fumbled to restart her car. Before she could, the truck's door opened, and the masked figure stepped out. He carried a tire iron, the metal gleaming in the moonlight. "No, no, no," Taylor whispered, her voice breaking. She locked her doors and reached for her phone, only to remember it was dead. The figure approached, each step slow and deliberate. Taylor's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. The highway was deserted, no help in sight. Desperation took over. She threw her car into reverse, slamming the gas pedal. The tires spun on the icy road before gaining traction, and she sped backward, trying to put as much distance as possible between herself and the man. But the truck's engine roared to life, and the headlights blazed, blinding her. It came after her, faster than she could maneuver. Taylor swerved, her car spinning out and crashing into a snowbank. The truck stopped a few feet away, its engine idling as the figure stepped out again. Taylor could barely breathe as she watched him approach. This time, there was no escape. She screamed as he shattered her window with the tire iron, the cold air rushing in. Her screams were muffled by the sound of the truck's engine revving, drowning out her pleas for mercy. The next morning, Taylor's car was found abandoned on the side of the highway, its doors open and the driver missing. Police chalked it up to a drunken accident, a tragic consequence of New Year's partying. But those who knew the legend of the Road Reaper whispered a different story, of a masked killer who hunted the highways every New Year's Eve, targeting those too impaired to fight back. The New Year's Eve party at the old waterfront hotel was a spectacle of glittering lights and champagne-soaked revelry. Avery hadn't wanted to come. She didn't like parties, and she especially didn't like this one, held in the crumbling skeleton of a once grand building slated for demolition. But her friends had insisted, claiming it was the last chance to experience the place before it was gone forever. The ballroom was packed, the crowd swaying to a playlist of old and new hits. A massive digital clock hung over the stage, counting down the hours, minutes, and seconds until midnight. Beneath its glow, a band played jazzed-up versions of classic tunes, and a fog machine pumped out an eerie mist that swirled around their feet. Avery drifted toward the edges of the room, clutching her drink and trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone. The crowd's energy was electric, but something about the atmosphere unsettled her. The air was heavy, the kind of stifling pressure that promised a thunderstorm, or something worse. Enjoying the party? A man's voice cut through the noise. Avery turned to see a tall stranger in a vintage tuxedo. His slicked-back hair and sharp smile made him look like he'd stepped out of a 1920s photograph. "It's okay," Avery said, trying not to sound rude. "You?" He chuckled. "It's been a long time since I've been to a party like this." Before she could ask what he meant, the man pointed toward the clock. "Better enjoy yourself. Midnight comes faster than you think." Avery frowned, but when she looked back, he was gone, vanished into the throng of partiers. Unease settled in her chest. She turned to find her friends, but the crowd had thickened, and the faces around her were unfamiliar. The music seemed louder, the lights dimmer. She wandered through the maze of rooms, her unease growing with every step. The hotel's age showed in the peeling wallpaper, cracked plaster, and uneven floors. In the quieter corners, she could almost hear the building creaking, as though it were alive and shifting in its final hours. Eventually, she found herself in a side hallway, far from the party. The air was colder here, and her breath fogged in front of her. She noticed a trail of wet footprints leading down the hall, as though someone had just walked through a puddle. Curiosity got the better of her. She followed the trail to a door marked "Staff Only." Pushing it open, she found herself in the hotel's old kitchen. The footprints ended in the center of the room, where a single black and white photograph sat on the counter. It showed a New Year's Eve party from decades ago, the ballroom filled with people in vintage attire. Avery squinted and felt her stomach drop. The man in the tuxedo was in the photograph, staring directly at the camera. A loud bang made her jump. The kitchen door slammed shut on its own, and the lights flickered. The music from the ballroom sounded distant now, muffled and distorted. Avery's heart raced as she backed toward the door, her fingers trembling as she reached for the handle. Before she could open it, a voice whispered behind her, low and cold, "You're not supposed to be here." She spun around, but the room was empty. The air grew colder, and the lights dimmed further, casting long shadows across the walls. The sound of the clock ticking reached her ears, louder and louder, as though the hotel itself was counting down. She bolted from the kitchen, the echo of footsteps chasing her through the halls. No matter which way she turned, she couldn't find her way back to the ballroom. The hotel seemed to twist and warp, leading her in circles. Panic clawed at her throat as the ticking of the clock grew deafening. Finally, she stumbled into the ballroom, only to find it empty. The decorations were tattered, the tables overturned, and the digital clock on the wall blinked erratically. Midnight had passed, and the countdown read midnight, frozen in place. Avery turned to leave, but the doors wouldn't budge. Shadows moved in the corners of the room, whispering in voices she couldn't understand. And then she saw them, the guests from the photograph. They materialized one by one, their faces pale and their eyes hollow. The man in the tuxedo stood at the center, his smile sharp and menacing. "This party never ends," he said, extending a hand toward her. "Stay with us." Avery tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat as the shadows enveloped her. The clock began to tick again, its numbers counting backward, dragging her further into the past. The last ride of the year. Dana hated being the last one to leave the party. Her roommates, Claire and Jess, had already taken off with their boyfriends, leaving her to hail a rideshare alone. It was just past 2 a.m., the party crowd thinning as fireworks lit up the New Year's Eve sky. She hugged her jacket tightly against the chill and checked her phone. Her rideshare was still 10 minutes away. The street outside the frat house was eerily quiet. Most of the students had either crashed inside or staggered home. Dana shifted on her feet, scrolling through her phone to avoid the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. A car pulled up to the curb, a black sedan, shiny and sleek. The driver rolled down the window, revealing a man in his mid-30s with a wide, too friendly smile. "You Dana?" She frowned, glancing at her app. The car in front of her wasn't the make or model listed, and her driver's name was supposed to be Lucas, not this guy. "No, I'm waiting for someone else, she said, stepping back. Come on, the man coaxed, his smile widening. I'm the replacement. Lucas couldn't make it, so I'm covering his route. Her heart thudded harder. No, thanks, she said firmly, backing away. The man's expression darkened for a split second before he plastered the smile back on. Suit yourself, he said, and the car peeled away, its tires screeching against the pavement. Relief flooded Dana as she watched the sedan disappear down the road. She kept an eye on her phone until her actual rideshare arrived. A white hatchback with the driver's name, Lucas, matching her app. She climbed in, glancing over her shoulder to make sure the black sedan wasn't lurking nearby. Lucas was polite, if quiet, and Dana let her nerves settle as the car headed toward her off-campus apartment. The streets were mostly empty, the city subdued now that the New Year's excitement had died down. They were halfway there when Dana noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. Bright, glaring, and too close for comfort. That car's been following us for a while, she muttered to Lucas. He glanced in the mirror and frowned. Weird. Hang tight. I'll take a detour. He turned down a side street, then another, weaving through the grid of the city. But the car stayed behind them, relentless. Dana's stomach twisted as she recognized the sleek black sedan. Can you call the police? She asked, her voice trembling. Lucas nodded and pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, the sedan surged forward, slamming into their bumper. Dana screamed as the impact jolted her forward. Lucas cursed and sped up, but the sedan stayed on their tail, ramming them again. I'm going to drive to the station, Lucas shouted. Dana clutched her phone, her fingers shaking as she tried to call 911. The operator's voice was calm, but Dana's words spilled out in a frantic rush. The sedan rammed them a third time, harder than before. Lucas lost control, the car skidding onto the shoulder of the road. The sedan pulled up beside them, and the driver got out. A tall figure wearing a black hoodie, his face obscured in the shadows. Dana's blood ran cold. Drive, she screamed. Lucas floored it, the tires spinning before the car shot forward. The sedan didn't follow this time, but Dana didn't relax. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see those headlights roaring up behind them again. They reached the police station within minutes, and Lucas parked right in front of the doors. Dana stumbled out of the car, her legs weak and trembling. Inside, the officers listened to their story and promised to investigate. They even offered to escort Dana home, which she gratefully accepted. As she sat in the back of the squad car, her mind replayed the night's events over and over. The black sedan was never found. No license plate, no trace. But every New Year's Eve after that, Dana stayed home, locking her doors and windows. She didn't trust the roads anymore, not after realizing how close she'd come to vanishing into the night.